I just want to say a really big welcome for everyone who is on the call. Thank you for joining us for this lovely webinar today. I'm really delighted to have you here for what I really think is going to be a very inspiring session. We focus on for today's discussion is sport management, micro-credential, a new approach to further education. Our presenter, Steve Osborne, is currently a principal lecturer in sports management and development at Cardiff Met University. Steve has worked closely with CIMSPA for donkey's years, and most recently he has become the interim chair of the Professional Development Board, which we're all very, very excited about. For this session, just to say that we've got the chat function, which I've already put a message in there. Please do use it throughout. You can ask any kind of questions, kind of your thoughts, any feedback, kind of always really welcome that. Alternatively, there is the Q&A box too. Like if you'd rather do that, it keeps it anonymous. And also just to make you aware, this session is being recorded and will be shared publicly as well. So we would only use kind of first names and bits and pieces when discussing as well with questions. So please know that there is an element of anonymity outside of this discussion as well. So thank you very much for joining us. And Steve, welcome. This is so happy and delighted to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Meg, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Colleagues, thank you ever so much for giving your time this evening to listen and to ask your questions. We also appreciate that a number of colleagues have put the request in to have this session recorded. So the plan this evening is to use the time that we have available, but be respectful of the fact that it is the evening. I know you're all busy, and the aim is to provide some information and background about where micro-credentials have come from, why the approach, and then specifically the requests are to look at the provision that we're currently launching with CIMSPA. So a little bit like a mini open day, provide some information about what we're doing, what we're releasing, how we might be working with learners now and in the future, and then a little bit about how we hope the rest of our colleagues in higher education start coming on the journey with us, and how that will expand in the future. So that's the mini plan. I am going to share a presentation for the recording. I will progress through it. If there are questions as I'm talking, Meg is going to monitor the chat and we can save them up. But I'm also happy, Meg, that if you want to interrupt me and if there's a burning question about what I'm talking about, we can do that too. So I'm just going to share my presentation. Is that visible, Meg?
Yep, you're all good.
Perfect. Okay, so as Meg has introduced me, I'm a principal lecturer in professional workforce development and sports management at Cardiff Metropolitan University. And in working with CIMSPA, we've been exploring for a number of years, certainly since 2016, 2017, when I've been working quite intensively with CIMSPA, the idea that we have one of the largest sport and physical activity workforces in Europe. We're often well trained in a number of areas, but that training has to continue, and as the sector evolves, our workforce needs to evolve. And we also recognise that the pipeline of talent from schools, further education, universities is one part of that recruitment, but we also have an existing workforce and lots of talented people that want to continue to develop and progress their careers. And the challenge, quite rightly from the sector, is how can we unlock different types of training and education for our existing workforce in a way that's accessible, realistic, and supports what the sector needs when they need it. One of those areas has been the concept of micro-credentials. This is an area that's not just impacting on our sector, but multiple sectors around the UK and across Europe and globally. And I've been leading a number of projects, one specific large project related to the sector, but funded by Welsh Government to test and challenge what we can do as higher education and to set some clear, I suppose, exemplars and benchmarks that we can work with other universities and further education colleges to really exploit and provide clear clear frameworks to support the sector where it's needed. So that's a little bit about the background. My plan is to take you through an introduction and just clarify what a micro-credential is, how we've designed a pathway related to professional standards, and then speak a little bit more about the micro-credential that we're launching and running with CIMSPA's support in this next 6-month period. A module, a micro-credential that we've been running in pilot form at least once with a group of learners, and now we're launching it formally as part of an ongoing rollout of courses over the next few years. So we'll look at specific learning outcomes, how we're designing that to make it accessible, and the obvious questions that learners would ask, what the assessment's like, how will I learn, how will you support me, and then open the floor to any questions you have at the end. I suppose what I would like to really stress to the colleagues in the session and those maybe watching the recording is what we're trying to do is design education training for the sector. And this isn't about retrofitting courses, whether they be management or any other disciplines and subject areas, and providing generic training, but actually listening to what the sector needs and wants and responding to that, recognizing the scale and the scope and the diversity of the sector as well. Certainly when we start talking about the managerial aspects, we have managers that run stadia, we have managers that run fitness centres, and they operate at different levels. So our team leaders all the way to the chief exec. So what we're doing is thinking about how we can design effective programs that are tailored and meet the needs of certain types of learners and individuals, but very much focused on what the sector needs and where it needs that intervention. So it's not about generic training or pushing training on the sector that we think you need, but actually sitting down and working with you to design something that's effective and will support people in their ambitions. A lot of that is linked to a wider set of work that we're doing, and that includes making sure that we've got data-informed insights, whether it be hard data that we're getting from government sources or more qualitative data in terms of engaging with employers, industry leaders, and gaining feedback. So the Sports and Physical Activity Workforce Observatory is another project I'm working with CIMSPA on. And what we're really now starting to see is a real detailed set of rich insights, metrics from a whole range of sources that give us a clear perspective on what the sector might need, where the skills gaps may be, where the training mismatches may be in terms of people may have qualifications, they may be technical qualifications because the early career roles may be technical coaches, instructors, but as they progress into managerial roles, they might need a different type of training. So that initial set of qualifications is relevant, the initial experiences are relevant, but as they progress, how do we support new roles, different set of knowledge, and different sets of skills? The observatory is really starting to uncover and give us a sense of clarity on that data all around the country in different types of roles, from the demographic side of our sector in different types of occupations to the geolocation of where our jobs are and the concentration of our professionals. We're also really starting to zone in and focus in on the context of where our workforce and the focus of their work, whether it's performance sport or community and participation sport settings. And all of this information should be fed into educational training and development design, and it's something that we've been working on and looking at when we started to consider this approach to micro-credential development. And I think as we've started to design and think about that, we've tried to maintain that balance of focus, so understanding, certainly in this context, in terms of sports management, that the diversity in terms of facilities or service provision, whether it be sports development or new forms of facilities like climbing centres, there's unique aspects of managing and running these sorts of facilities, but there's also some core and common ideas, theories, and principles that we can work with all sports managers on. So we're trying to maintain that balance in this education provision and design, and talk to people from all aspects of the sector to make sure that we're getting that balance right. And a lot of the preparatory work into this design has engaged a full range of leaders and organizations to really guide and influence what we're doing and how we're doing it. So in terms of taking all of that information and translating it into training, education and development, and we see that this type of provision, which is formal education, is complementary to the whole range and menu of training and development that's available to the sector. So I wanted to stress in the recording to people in the room, this isn't instead of, this we see as one component that can enhance and support other types of training and education development, whether it be informal and conferences, whether it be the information sets that are provided through bite-sized YouTube clips, or information sets of books or journals, magazine periodicals, all part of it, people's education, training, and development. But sometimes you do need a formal qualification, and that formality is where micro-credentials will sit. And I think certainly Cardiff Metropolitan University has been on the professionalisation journey with CIMSPA for a number of years now. We've been present, we've been contributing, we've been happy to act as a guinea pig when we've looked at things like degree accreditation. But it's about how, as an institution, and my colleagues in other institutions support the sector in building that professional credibility, not just for ourselves within the sector, but how we are perceived and how other professions see us as a credible sector too. And I certainly feel hopeful that we're really gaining some momentum with that in terms of our position with health and education, and the idea of having that professional body, professional credibility, chartered status, professional standards has all been part of that journey. But we also have to respond as educational institutions. If the sector is telling us our personal trainers and our entry managers need these skills, these knowledge sets, we have to then take that information and make sure that we're applying that to the design of our education, training and development, whether that be full degrees, whether that be embedding them into BTECs or apprenticeship training, and in this instance, how we're aligning that to micro-credentials. So this session is about how we've utilised that with managers, the idea of the support chain workforce, and recognising that those professional standards with CIMSPA are already recognising the hierarchical approach to management. So management tiers, our aspiring managers, our entry, our general managers, and then our senior and top executives. The professional standards are different because those skill sets for the management tiers are different, and quite rightly then the education training needs to match. So this is about making sure that what we're doing and what training and education we're designing is fit for purpose at the right level, and we are targeting learners that might need that training, and we're designing approaches that they can access in a more flexible and inclusive way. So that framework is certainly guiding our thinking in general terms. For this provision that I'm talking to you about today, we're very much centred on the entry manager as part of our pilot work over the last few years and with the Welsh Government. And we've taken the entry manager standard, and that's been a core to what we've designed and how we've approached. However, we are designing similar approaches with general and senior manager as well. And in general, when you dissect all the management and leadership standards from aspiring to senior manager, then there are clear thematic areas the sector is concerned about and want their managers to be trained in. The darker blue you can see on the screen is at the senior level. The lighter greens are at the junior level, so aspiring, entry and general manager. So with entry manager training and the work that we've been doing, we're focused on people, business functions, service improvements, operations and risk, but recognising to squeeze all of that into a single course is quite a lot when we have full business degrees and MBAs, and they focus, and other sectors focus on similar themes. There's a lot of information, education, training, theory, models, ideas that we can work and educate people on. It's about how we package that in an effective and inclusive way. So those standards and the information provided by the sector, by academia, to design what should be the needs and the wants of the sector in terms of skills and knowledge have very much influenced what we've done in terms of content, and then thinking about how we might design the learning and training environments that can be suitable. And that education inclusion is a really important element, recognizing that what's right for 16, 17-year-olds in further education colleges or sixth form schools, or maybe doing an apprenticeship training, and those 18 to 21-year-olds in university might not be the same approach that works for a 35-year-old practicing manager that's managing time, family, shift patterns. And for those that know me, I've spent time in that world. I've spent the early part of my career in junior and senior roles in the sector, and educating myself whilst working. So I think it's understanding what's right and good for learners from different aspects of that learning journey. And that's the approach that we've taken here. That's been the core to the work that we've been doing. What works for a 35-year-old manager that's got aspirations to move from an entry shift team leader, duty manager level to general manager. For the general manager, how do they move on to executive level? How can we access training in an effective way to support those career transitions and ambitions? So this, in our thinking and our design and our engagement with CIMSPA, it is about this lifelong development system, and thinking about how our colleagues progress through and the types and the balance of training they might need at different stages of their career. Recognizing in a broad sense, and this is from the United Nations Education Scientific Cultural Organization, this is how UNESCO, United Nations Education Scientific Cultural Organization, would audit and review in terms of a standardized approach all countries of the world, all disciplines, all subjects, all industries, 4 types of education training provision. And you will often see these themes in continuous profession development frameworks for health and medicine related professions, education, engineering. You can dissect and review all their professional development frameworks and ongoing CPD requirements, and you see this menu. So formal learning, non-formal, informal, and incidental. Incidental, doing the job, gaining learning through experience. That can still be managed and structured, and you can still reflect on that. We often see that in the other mature professions about how they submit their CPD. They will lean into reflective accounts and encourage their professionals to review their experiences and share them. Within formal, often it's networking, conferencing, mentoring, listening to podcasts and videos and reports, and that's part of the learning environment. Then what we often associate with CPD are things like courses, workshops, and then formal qualifications. So non-formal learning often are those short courses, bite size, the LinkedIn learning. It might be a certificated technical qualification. And then so it's organized. There's an outcome to it. There's an acknowledgement of the learning, but non-formal might be slightly different than to what we would see as learning sitting on formal qualification frameworks, so accredited degrees, lower level school compulsory education qualifications. So things that are highly regulated, have clear structures, sit on a qualifications and credit framework. And that's where micro-credentials fit. So we have short courses, we have bite-sized learning. Often that hasn't got a credit base, doesn't lead to a formal qualification, but can give you a digital badge or a certificate. And that's useful, and that's really relevant, and there's some really high quality work out there. And we've been working with a number of colleagues who are doing some fantastic work in that space. And we see that as beneficial. But if that doesn't lead to formal qualification, that can sometimes hold people back in their career ambitions and journeys. So micro-credentials very much sits in that formal learning space. It can have a credit, it sits on a qualifications framework, and it can lead to a formal qualification. So this is an example from Wales of a formal qualifications framework. Most qualifications frameworks in the UK are overseen then by the home nation's governments. This is the Welsh version. The levels are important. So the 8 levels in Wales are equivalent to the 8 levels in England. Scotland have a different numeric set of levels, but they're equivalent to the 8 levels. And often we're comfortable that levels 3 and 4, 2 and 3 sit at that sort of GCSE apprenticeships, A level, and a lot of our workforce sit in that level 2 to 3. But recognizing that apprenticeships at level 3 and A levels at level 3 lead to a formal qualification at that level. It's just different ways of getting to the end goal, maybe a more academic focus or more vocational focus, but the qualification sits at that qualification level. When we've looked at the professional standards for management, from entry manager up, then we feel that sits at 4, 5, 6 to certainly at executive level in comparison to other sectors. Then our executive level training should be at that sort of master's level 7. And these frameworks often are equivalent to frameworks across Europe and globally, so we can map and then transfer and translate our qualifications so that you can take them to other countries and they're formally recognized. So these formal frameworks are really important, but what comes with this formality is a high level of auditing, quality assurance, quality frameworks, clear requirements to the education training provision that sit at each of these levels. And we've had to negotiate that in designing how we can unbundle a major qualification into more bite-sized chunks without losing that level of quality. So the best way to think about micro-credentials is to start with the credentials aspect. They're formal. We're able to verify, validate, and confirm somebody's learning achievements through a clear set of credits at a level. And in many cases, that will lead on to something that's a formal qualification, an A level, a BTEC, a degree, a master's. In designing those education training products, we often have to align and consider what each of those qualification levels require in general terms, what the broad subjects like sports management or sport-related degrees would require across the sector and across higher education. So what does academia deem to be appropriate? And now that we have professional standards, we can then fully align our design and our education training provision to what the sector wants. Cardiff Met's been doing that certainly since 2018 with our sports management degrees. We, like many others now, I think over 30 universities have accredited degrees against at least one of their professional standards, whether they're management, coaching, fitness instructing, and so on. So it's a real commitment for institutions to listen and integrate and embed the sector's needs into the training and development provision. So for the work that we've been doing, micro-credentials, that formality, whether we're designing a full degree or a very small bite-sized chunk, the commitment is the same. But for this provision, going back to that inclusivity, we've had to think about the sector's learners and the learners that we're targeting for this type of provision. Doing a full master's, doing a full degree, whilst managing life, career, shift patterns is something that is switching people off. And we need to open up provision, not make it difficult to access. So we've considered the barriers and the issues. We've spoken to existing professionals. We've run pilots of this provision with existing professionals to learn as much as we can about getting the balance right, whether that's making it highly contextual, drawing on their experiences, giving a little bit of self-direction to more experienced learners about how they manage the learning, how they can fit it in. Can we make it highly work-related and so on? So this has been part of our design thinking. And when it comes to the idea of applying all these principles, as I said earlier on, this isn't something that's our sector and UK-centric. These are conversations going on across Europe, in multiple discipline and professional areas, and more locally in the UK, and certainly in Welsh Government have been highly focused on the idea of professional, flexible, accessible learning, recognizing industrial trends and restructuring. And we need to make sure our education, training and development is accessible to everybody across their lifespan. So it's a great challenge to rise to, and something that we've been working hard to get right. So taking all of that into account, the sector in the UK, the higher education sector in the UK, working with our quality assurance agencies, define a micro-credential as a course, an education course that is focused in a narrow field of learning. So it's not a full degree, but maybe part of a degree. It has a credit value. It sits and should sit at a level. We should be clear about what that level is, how many credits are associated with it. So what's the intensity of the learning? How many hours will you need to do? It needs learning outcomes. We formally accredit and verify that award, and then you would get acknowledgement of that. And that set of credits can be used to carry on a journey towards a full qualification, or you can stop. But instead of it being a full degree, so if you look at this diagram, level 4, 5, and 6 would all need to be completed to get a BA or a BSc honours, whichever subject you're looking at. So often each level and each block in this instance is worth 20 credits. So each level for each degree, whether it's an engineering degree or a sports management degree, there are 360 credits required of training, 120 at each level. A credit in the UK is equivalent, one credit is equivalent to 10 hours of learning. So you're expecting to see about 3,600 hours of equivalent learning, whether it be sitting in formal classrooms, doing assessments and assignments, doing additional reading, to complete those assessments and assignments to be able to secure your full bachelor's award. Now, we recognise that 18 to 21-year-olds do that intensively. They do it in a macro qualification, so they do it in one big intense block over a number of years. That's not often feasible for people in their mid to late 20s plus. So the challenge is, how can we unbundle this mass program into smaller bite-sized chunks? And we've started at this level 4, this entry level. It's best fits with the entry manager professional standards. So your duty managers, your sports development officers, people that haven't had any management training but find themselves in management roles, and then general manager at level 5 and 6, and senior managers at master's level. And taking that layer, we have designed a set of micro-credentials, so 6 courses that can be studied independently. You don't have to sign up to the entire pathway. If you only need training on principles of management and marketing, which I'm talking about today, then you can do that course, but not be committed to signing up to an entire pathway. And often if a student in university stops at the end of level 4, we would offer them a level 4 qualification, so a certificate of higher education. Now, we often see other level 4 qualifications in the sector, whether that be through CIM or ILM. They offer level 4 training, and it might be they use the language of diploma or certificate. That can be sometimes confusing, but it's the credit level and the credit value that's most important. So often an ILM certificate or diploma would be 20 to 40 credits, whereas a certificate of higher education to lead you towards a full bachelor's award this level would require you to complete 120 credits. So the sector does a good job. Those providers do an excellent job of providing training and education, and they clearly articulate now the credit value and the training intensity or number of hours you'd need to complete that. What we've designed is we've unbundled this, recognizing that people still want formal qualifications, like the idea of completing degrees. So we have to take them on that journey of how do we still complete 3,600 hours of learning, but work with people that are managing those competing priorities. So we can break this pathway up. We're not signing up to the entire pathway. We're not charging for the entire pathway. We recognize that people need to engage with that pathway in a flexible way, which might be a course at a time, and then they can stop. Maybe they want to re-engage. There's flexibility, certainly with other institutions that we're working with, to say that maybe you do a bit of your training with Cardiff Met and then complete your training with a different institution. This pathway and the rules that we have also allow us to recognize that people who are more mature and experienced can bring that experience to the table. So if you've been running as an operations manager for 20 years, you might not need the operations management micro-credential, and we can recognize that prior learning, your experience and any other training, and give credit around that experience rather than forcing you through the learning if you want the final qualification certificate. So the micro-credential approach is unbundling big degrees into smaller bite-sized chunks, but allowing you to stack those bite-sized chunks towards formal qualifications if you want them, without forcing people to complete that. Certainly for employers and executives that we've been working with, thinking about their workforces, they quite like the idea of investing maybe in business critical areas and having 10 learners on one micro-credential rather than one learner on a pathway for a certificate of higher education. But that flexibility is there. And all our micro-credentials, all 6, have been aligned to the entry manager standard, and CIMSPA have given that formal endorsement and linked CPD points to that too. So in terms of focusing in on the micro-credential that we're launching and piloting, it's one of those 6 in the full pathway, where we recognize that the sector needs to understand this approach and what is a micro-credential. So rather than flood the sector with 6 courses in one go, we feel like a graduated response is the most appropriate way to work with the sector, understand the needs, get the provision right. So we're starting with one of maybe the more popular requests. So we've had requests around ops management, but sort of core principles of management and marketing, which is one of the micro-credentials, seems to be one of the areas that we're getting higher frequencies of requests for, particularly that duty manager, sports development officer level, where they're stepping into management for the first time. So what are the principles? How can we understand and get that toolkit going? And that's really where we've started. So the course itself really is that. It's about introduction to the principles of management and marketing, establishing that general toolkit, planning, organizing, leading, introduction to decision making, but with a real intensive focus on how these ideas and theories, which often get presented really well on core business and MBA programs, but how do they relate to the sports sector with a lot more designed examples and application and thinking around what does that look like in a community sports facility or a sports stadia or a community sports setting with sports development. The course, the micro-credential, sits at that level 4. So the first year of a degree as an exemplar. It's worth 20 credits, so it's equivalent to 200 hours of learning. But the way we deliver that learning is different to sitting you down in classrooms. And that's, again, through feedback that we've had from colleagues. We recognise that sitting down in dedicated timetable sessions has been an issue for people. So we've designed the course around that intensity, but allow people to be a bit more self-directed and self-paced over a period of time. recognizing that some people may want to accelerate and get that done in 10 weeks, and others might need longer to balance out those competing priorities. So actually, we're only asking people to sign up to a course, to self-manage their learning with us supporting, recognizing that people may want to access the learning materials and pace themselves in different ways over a set period. So we're allowing up to 25 weeks to complete those 200 hours. We've gone online. What we talk about in terms of asynchronous, then the materials are available. You're able to follow the journey of the units and the information in these sort of digital workbooks. But we are there in the background. I am there providing support and prompts, providing personal tutoring, but organizing that around people's availability, organizing drop-in sessions where people want them, but recognizing that asking people to turn up at 12 p.m. for a tutorial every Thursday or come to a campus is quite restrictive, and those barriers are starting to turn people off this type of provision. So that's the sort of core principles of the course. Costing wise, when you look at degree costs, they're quite large, and these are real issues, and we recognise that central government and maybe the home nations governments in the next few years will be bringing lifelong learning loans into every sector for this type of provision. But we felt we would work on a part-time framework fees basis, and we would, and through feedback from people that have been interested in the course, make sure that there's those flexible payment options. So these costs come around the sort of same equivalents to other providers, private providers in the sector, but it's the credit value and the intensity of training that we have to consider when pricing and costing every single course. So the flexible payment, I think, is been the most requested aspect of this provision, and that's something that we've built in now. So we recognise that small business owners that want to develop their training can't always pay out lump sums for themselves or their staff base. They need that cash flow. So that's the sort of feedback that we've responded to. As I said, the micro credential, this particular pilot course is accredited. It takes up aspects of the entry manager professional standard and focuses on the core management and the marketing aspects and communication aspects. The other micro credentials will continue to cover other parts of the professional standard. We can't squeeze it all in because there's a lot of information and training to provide. I'm not going to go through every single point in terms of the learning outcomes, but the core ethos of this micro-credential is about establishing that toolkit, the core management and marketing principles and theories, decision-making, and helping people understand how they can use and apply those ideas as entry managers with their teams and the individuals that they're working with. And on the marketing side, again, understanding what it is and what it's not, starting to think about the application, moving beyond just the promotional and the communication aspects of marketing. We present the information in 6 progressive units covering all aspects of the foundations of management to pioneering theories, how they may apply to sport and physical activity, into more contemporary ideas and theories around organization behavior, and then team and individual management, and then sections around how marketing fits into those frameworks. Quite a lot of ideas and content to communicate in those 6 units, but we try to do it in a way that's progressive and allows the theories to build on the previous unit. So there's a clear sense of order and progression to help you with your learning. The approach to that learning, as I've already suggested, is self-paced. So you progress those learning materials in this online environment, but we are there to support and to answer questions through forums, to have drop-in sessions, and then our commitment to all our learners in this environment, whether they're 18-year-old students studying full-time on a macro course, full degree, or a micro credential is that our learners get one-to-one support when they need it during the course. So there's a commitment to providing tutorials and conversation support around assessments as and when you need it. The learning resources are quite diverse, so this isn't just a series of PowerPoints that you have to rattle through. We've got quite dedicated learning resource platforms embedded into our university systems, which allows us to look at a whole range of different types of online learning tasks and activities beyond just sitting and listening. And so discussion boards, forums, podcasts, information sets, case studies. For operations management, we're using ideas around 360 and virtual desktop environments and tasks, so you can scroll around environments and do more interactive tasks. So we're really stretching that range of what we can do in this space and through this format. So the course environment would be standard. This is the sort of, we use Moodle, or other universities use Blackboard. So this is our central university virtual learning system. This is where all the learning is housed. You, once enrolled, you access this and progress through those units at a pace. You can't go from unit 1 to unit 6. You have to go through the progression. It unlocks as you complete each unit. In this space, all the information outcomes for each unit are stored for you, and then the learning portal is where the actual interactive tasks live. We've used a portal that is complementary to different devices, so it scales appropriately to an iPad, a desktop, or a mobile phone, recognizing that people will have different types of devices. And the information and the interactive tasks, the downloadables, are all in those spaces. The reason we like using this particular platform is that it tracks what you've done, and you can stop at any point, whether that's in the afternoon, after a shift. Some of our pilot learners were there in the early hours of the morning tracking through, but it remembers where you've stopped. So when you re-access the point, you can carry on where you left off. And those learning tasks allow us to do some really creative and inventive things in this sort of online environment that we haven't been able to do maybe certainly in the last 10 or 15 years. And that we're trying to stretch that as much as possible to make it useful and as interesting as possible. Once you get to the end of a unit, there are formative tasks to unlock the next unit just to check that understanding. But the core assessments to this then are designed to get the credits, like all the other courses and degrees. We do need to have formal assessments to test your knowledge against the learning outcomes. But we've tried to design those assessments in this instance around the fact that we're working with experienced people, whether they're new to the sector or whether they're or worked in the sector for a long time, tapping into people's experience and knowledge, wherever that's come from, is a critical part to designing appropriate assessments here. So the portfolio and the written tasks tend to be centered around how we can apply the new ideas and theories that we've provided into people's context, allowing them to use their own organizations or provided organization to give that context and to scrutinize that. Will it work for me? How will I use this? How can these ideas be applied in my context? And giving colleagues that scope to really explore what works or doesn't work for them. And the two assessments therefore are linked. The portfolio is a more general assessment about a range of ideas, and then the report for this micro-credential is about designing a managerial proposal about introducing a new concept, idea, ways of working, as if you were presenting that to your direct line manager or an executive. How is this going to help with our business critical tasks? How will this affect our performance? So it's very context orientated, applied. So we're not sitting people down and putting them in exam halls or making them do sort of general essays about ideas. We're trying to build on people's experience and understanding, so it's seen as a useful part of the learning process. And as a registered learner, the whole learning ecosystem and support are opened up to every single learner, whether they're on a 20 credit micro-credential or a full degree. So accessing all the databases, all the information sets, the journals, the academic peer-reviewed databases, and more applied data sets through Statista or providers like Mintel, all part of the support that every learner gets on any formal qualification, whether a bite size or macro. So I'm going to finish and draw this to an end. That sort of gives you a flavour of what the course is about. What we talked to, as part of the induction, what we talked to about adult learners re-entering is being clear about what the learning goals and your learning goals are, how to access and re-engage and build the habit of learning back into your lifestyle, work, and general weekly timetable. And it is about finding room for it, but knowing that you can make that fit in this approach, rather than forcing you into structured timetables, being in a certain place at a certain time. A self-paced, self-regulated approach allows you to build it in, and certainly the pilot work, we've seen people build it into shift patterns when they're doing it regularly, on shift or at their lunchtime. Some prefer morning work, some prefer evening work, and some colleagues who have got young children were putting them to bed and doing the work afterwards, and that's the feedback that we had from them. And that was the best time for them. So that's the sort of flexibility we've tried to build in, but we encourage that engagement and seeking assistance, using the drop-in sessions, getting the support and asking you questions in the personal tutorials, but they again can be scheduled around people's timetables, and that's my role as the program lead and the educator, is to work with you and make that as flexible as possible. So we give a roadmap and encourage people to follow that, but people naturally through the pilot work have done that at a pace that suits them. There's an absolute end point and an absolute start point, and how you manage it in between then is about working with you as experienced practitioners and learners to manage that. And that's our little approach, our micro-credential pilot. We're currently taking enrolments. We have a number of colleagues that have been discussing this with us over the autumn and starting to think about now the enrolment. But my role beyond this session then is to be available for one-on-one meetings and discussions for people that are interested, and to ask their questions and then start pushing them through that online enrolment. The aim is to have people begin in February, towards the end, beginning to the end of February would be the cut-off date, and then we can start people off at a pace that suits them. And this micro-credential will run until the summer, and then we will evaluate and start looking at rolling out the other 5 micro-credentials in this particular stackable pathway. And then as we start building momentum, we'll start looking at the higher levels and executive training too. Okay, so that's the information I wanted to provide this evening. I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
Lovely. Well, I'll just give people a bit of time to type questions out in the chat and bits and pieces. But I suppose for me, Steve, something that was coming to mind, I think, from working quite closely with people in the sector, is just understanding perhaps a bit more around what support could be available for neurodiverse people. Obviously when I went to university a rather long time ago, and there was quite a lot then, so I'd be very interested to hear the approach.
I think in this instance, the support structures that the university provides any student are available, sometimes in proportional format. So we have a unit 0, so there are 6 learning units, I should say. There's a unit 0 where we provide a lot of information and support and access to certain support structures where people may need to ask questions or think about their approach. But that support sometimes isn't a dedicated counsellor or access to financial support in this micro sense, but the advice and the guidance can be there. And my role then as the educator, as the the human in the room, the person that sits there in the background, is to work with every single learner and provide that support. So we've had lots of interesting conversations through our pilot work, where people were nervous about coming back in. I don't know how to write. I can't remember how I did this. I don't know how to cite things. Whole range of questions. I suppose the approach that we've taken is that we recognise that will always be the case, and our role in the first part of the course is to work with learners to identify where those concerns are and how we can support and build their confidence and their reintegration into this type of learning. That's why forcing people into set classrooms at set times, it doesn't always work. And the personal tutoring sessions then are very different because of that, because we're trying to tailor the needs and the discussions around that. So for some, it's slowing them down and making sure that they can process the information and they're not just rushing through. For others, it's trying to build confidence that, you know, in answering questions or putting some comments down on a reflective task, that it's okay to do that, and they can be as descriptive as they want. So I think higher education does a really good job of supporting all range and all types of learners. I think that level of support, if they're sitting there in universities for 3 years, it can be very intensive and needs to be. I think if somebody's with us for 25 weeks, it's how do we get them in, settled, feel supported, accessing advice. We've tried to make sure that there are at least some proportional services that can support that, and then my role as the educator to bespoke that where we can.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Steve. That's really great. I've got just a comment from Jordan just saying, really big thanks for this. Very interesting approach and very keen to see more of. It's something we've seen lots of other sectors do. Kind of, I suppose, it's really exciting for our sector to have that kind of put forward as, like I said, as an option for everyone to start pursuing as well. But no set questions. Chris has said the same, kind of really seeing the value in doing the qualification and the bite-sized chunks as well. Wish this was about when he did his degree. Yeah, exactly. So it's really, really great.
So yeah, Chris's points are really important, and I think, you know, we've got Chris, I think, is a former colleague, and he's worked really hard to progress through. And it's that, how do we support really talented people like Chris to be able to access the same level of training without sort of feeling under pressure to balance it all out. And so thank you for your comment, Chris. I think having talented people being able to access the training and see that their careers accelerate is really what is the motivation here. So yeah, thanks both for your comments. And the other sectors are looking at us too, because we've been setting a pace here. So I've had some lovely conversations with colleagues in health and in education who are trying to mimic what we're doing, and think about the application. So it's really good to be setting some good standards that the other professions are looking in on too.
Definitely. I think that's the thing with our sector. I think you feel just such like inspirational people, real pioneers as well. I think within like I can speak for like my colleagues, and again, like I think it applies to the sector, is that there's just so much like get up and go and you just do. And I think that's really unique to us. And yeah, something that I'm really proud of. And like you said, like having this fitting in with that is a natural win.
We're a dynamic sector. We always have been. We've got dynamic people, and if we can help them expand that toolkit, that's the exciting bit for me. It's about we're often busy doing lots of things, and our own professional development sometimes kind of goes on the back burner whilst we're so passionate in delivering the services and designing and working with our clients or participants. But if we can improve what we do by 1% because we're thinking differently or doing something differently through some additional training, I think we can all sign up to that. And but how do you work with a dynamic sector and enthusiastic people in a way that doesn't slow them down. And I suppose that's the ambition with this type of provision.
Definitely. No, that's very exciting. So thank you so much, Steve. Honestly, it's been lovely.